It's Father Randy coming at you live from St. Patrick's Church in Maytown for another e-learning for the 2020-2021 school year. We just celebrated the feast day of St. Charles Borromeo, one of the great saints of the church, and also one of Father Randy's Dream Team saints. And so I thought for our e-learning we would talk about the life of St. Charles, and I chose this location of St. Patrick's Church, Maytown, because as you can see behind me, they have a beautiful window, a stained glass window of St. Charles Borromeo. So the interesting thing out here, the windows in Maytown's church, they're named after the person that dedicated the funds to pay for the window. And so St. Charles Borromeo window that you see behind me was by Mr. and Mrs. Charles McBride. They were the patrons here at St. Patrick's Church who donated the monies for this beautiful window that we have of St. Charles Borromeo. You can see either side of the stained glass windows the two beautiful stations of the cross that they have too. So this is just a beautiful church out here in Maytown, as all of our churches are. And part of the what I wanted to accomplish with the e-learnings for our CCD children, Mom and Dad, is that your children would become experts in the church where their parishioners at. So whatever church you've registered in, if it's Our Lady Perpetual Help in Sublette, St. Mary the Assumption Church, West Brooklyn, or out here at St. Patrick's Church in Maytown, that your children and you would become ambassadors for your specific church. So each church is so beautiful that you would know more specifically about your church where you're registered than the other churches. So that if a friend or a family member came from out of town to visit, maybe on one of the feast days or during one of the Christmas or Easter solemnity seasons, you could give them a little tour of your church. And so wouldn't that be something if your children were parishioners out here at St. Patrick's Church, Maytown, and they could talk coherently about the 8 saints that are portrayed in the windows out here. So this St. Charles Borromeo window is on the left side of the church, so if you came in the front doors, it would be on your left-hand side, and the altar would be over here, just to give you the layout of where this window actually is. But St. Charles Borromeo is one of my patron saints, and I actually pray one of my prayers before Mass as I'm vesting in the sacristy. I actually pray one of the prayers that St. Charles Borromeo wrote for his priest. He was the bishop of the Diocese of Milan in Italy, and so he wrote up a prayer to help his priest prepare to celebrate the Holy Mass. And this is a prayer that the priests have been praying in Italy for over 500 years. And Father Randy continues that tradition since St. Charles Borromeo is one of my patrons. I actually pray this prayer also. I'll just read it to you so that you can hear how beautiful it is. Remember, this is the prayer that I pray in the sacristy before I come out and actually celebrate the Eucharist, confect the body and blood, soul, and divinity of Christ for you and your children. The prayer goes, Father of mercies, forgive my failings, keep me in your grace, and lead me in the way of salvation. Give me strength in serving you as a follower of Christ, and may the Eucharist bring me your forgiveness and give me freedom to serve you all my life. May it help me to remain faithful and to give me the grace that I need in your service. May it teach me the way to eternal life. It's just a beautiful prayer that St. Charles Borromeo wrote, just to give you the years of his birth. He was born October 2nd in the year 1538, and he died on November 3rd in the year 1584. So a little less than 500 years ago he was born, and then that's interesting, the death date, November 3rd. So his feast day is actually November 4th. And so every year we celebrate Mass, where the prayers for the Mass are, the opening, closing, and prayer over the gifts are specifically for his feast day. So his feast day is November 4th. He died on November 3rd. And you'll find that's what happens with saints a lot. The very next day after they die, that becomes their birthday for their heavenly realm, their citizenship in heaven. And so since Charles Borromeo died on November 2nd, or November 3rd, I'm sorry, then his feast day becomes November 4th. So that's just something interesting to keep in mind for your own family members. So if the children have grandparents or family members that have passed away, just remember that when they become saints, their feast day will be the day after they died. And so my mom died on May 31st, 2019, And so her feast day became June 1st. So when she enters into heaven, and my family believes that that's happened since we've worked plenary indulgence for Mom. We celebrate June 1st as Mom's feast day saint. Okay, but getting back to St. Charles Borromeo, he's very particular for our time of what we're going through right now. We're going through this pandemic because of the coronavirus. Well, during St. Charles Borromeo's life, when he was the Bishop of Milan, he went through a plague. So something that's even worse than a pandemic is a plague. And there was a plague that hit northern Italy in the years 1576 to 1578. And so St. Charles Borromeo had to put up with some of the things that you and I are having to put up with too. Why don't I just zoom in a little bit? I hope I don't make you too dizzy, but I'll just show you the window, and then we'll go back to a little bit more of the narrative of St. Charles Borromeo. So hope that this doesn't make you too dizzy, but let me try to zoom in a little bit here. So you see St. Charles Borromeo, and he doesn't have his mitre on like a bishop, but he does have his zucchetto, that little red hat that he's wearing on the back of his head. It's called the zucchetto. So a bishop wears that. So you'll see Bishop Malloy when he comes to Maytown, St. Patrick, to celebrate our confirmation. He'll be wearing the mitre that you're used to seeing, and then underneath, when he takes that off for the Eucharistic prayer and the proclamation of the gospel and the homily that he gives, you'll see he's got a little zucchetto, that little hat on the back of St. Charles Borromeo's head. Because our Bishop Malloy is a bishop, just like St. Charles was, this is part of the headgear that they wear. But St. Charles here, beautiful window with that little zucchetto, and then you can see he's holding a cross in his hands, and he's got a little cord, I don't know if you can see it, that red around his neck. It's not a tie, but it's actually, let me zoom in on it here. It's a cord. You can see the knot there, huh? And he wore that cord, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So you can see the cord running down his elbow. It goes all the way to the bottom here. So just above his feet, you can see the two loose ends of the cord over by those blue flowers. See that? Hope I'm not making you too dizzy. And you can see also that he's barefoot, huh? So that'll come into play a little bit later on when we talk about the life of St. Charles. Okay, let me come around. So, like I said, there was a plague in the year 1576 to 1578 when St. Charles was the bishop of Milan. And just to give you a little perspective, so 17,000 people wound up dying during that 3-year span that the plague was. And the total population of Milan was 120,000. So when they lost 17,000 people to death because of the plague, this is the bubonic plague, of course, that's about 1/6 of the population. And today, it's the lay health officials, they claim that it was because of St. Charles Borromeo's actions that so few people did die. So just in proportion, the city of Venice is not too far away from Milan in Italy. And Venice was a smaller town, and there 40,000 people died. And so the health officials at the time credited St. Charles Borromeo with how smart, how wise he acted when the virus came, or the plague came around. And they asked the question, why was Milan spared? Because they had relatively few deaths for the size of the city. And St. Charles' response was, it's not by our prudence, which was caught asleep, and was not by the science of the doctors, who couldn't even discover the source of the contagion, much less find a cure. And it's not by the city officials who abandoned the city. No, St. Charles Borromeo said, my dear children, it was only by the mercy of God that the city of Milan was spared. And so don't we take things into our own hands? And even now, during this pandemic of the coronavirus, we think that by doing different things or trying to develop a vaccine that we can conquer the virus. There's no way to conquer something like a virus or a pandemic or a plague. You have to rely on the mercy of God. So sometimes God sends something like the coronavirus or the plague that we're enduring now to see if we'll do penance for our sins And so that's really what St. Charles Borromeo did, was he made the whole city of Milan do penance for mankind's sin against God, and he believes that that's what caused the city to be spared so few fatalities from his own town there. But it was in August of 1576 when the plague first broke out, and on the 11th of August, and St. Charles was actually out of town celebrating the funeral mass of another bishop in a neighboring city. And when he was coming back, he heard of the news that the plague had broke out. Many people were leaving the city of Milan. They were fleeing the city because they didn't want to catch the virus. And the more people that are around, the greater percentage you have of catching the virus. And even the townsfolk, the government officials, they were starting to leave the town as well. And so the governor actually asked St. Charles Borromeo, as the bishop, to take over. And so the first thing that St. Charles did was he started having more masses and more processions. And the government officials said, maybe we should have few, Father Borromeo, because the more we bring these people together, the greater chance they have of catching the virus from one another with the pandemic. So Charles Borromeo said, no, that's exactly what the devil would want us to do, to have fewer masses, to have fewer processions. And so he said, we're going to have more, and we're going to ask God to have mercy on us. And so what he did was he set up 19 different stations throughout the city. He had like a little pole, and he set up altars and set up a little crucifix. And if you go to Milan today, you can actually still see some of these altars, and they have the crucifix on a pole where these St. Charles Borromeo set up altars for his priests to celebrate Mass. Like I said, 19 outdoor altars throughout the city, and he had the priests celebrate several Masses in the morning each day, so that smaller crowds could come to the Masses, but more people could come by having more Masses then. And so those 19 pillars that were there set up throughout the city, it was so that people could continue to receive the Eucharist. And so the priests were given out Holy Communion at these Masses, and also these pillars where the crucifixes were, they also became places where St. Charles had his priests give catechesis. And so another thing that they didn't do during the pandemic was not gather as children to learn their faith. They didn't discontinue their CCD classes, just like we haven't discontinued our CCD classes. We're still having our classes, and the small groups that we have at the hall in Sublette, and we're keeping the children with their masks on and the social distancing. And so we're doing exactly what Bishop Borromeo did in his diocese during the plague. We're doing the same thing for the pandemic in our area. We're continuing to catechize. And for those of you probably watching this e-learning, the fear that your mom and dad don't want you to come to the hall in Sublette, for the reason that you might have a greater chance of catching or contracting the virus, we have these e-learnings. So we're doing something that St. Charles Borromeo and Bishop Borromeo didn't have for his priests, was the ability of computers and electronics to videotape a catechetical learning and then have people play it back from the safety of their own homes. So I think we really have to thank God for the technology that he's given us, and especially for my brother who set up this technology for us. So my brother's the one that made the web page that we have, www.olph.marystpatrick.com, and my dad is the one that bought the license for our internet service. So we have now a website, and we never had that before the pandemic. So March 24th, that first weekend when the pandemic broke out, when we couldn't have the Masses, because of my family members, my dad and my brother, we could videotape the Masses and broadcast them. And ever since that March 24th, 25th weekend, we've filmed the Mass. And so you've been able to download on the recent Mass archive. You can go down there and watch any of the Masses that we had since the pandemic has struck. And that'll be the case for this Sunday's Mass as well. Okay? So we're doing things very similar to the way Bishop Borromeo did things, but it was just interesting that how he attacked the pandemic, fought back, and asked God to spare the town, asked for God's mercy on the people. And one thing that Bishop Borromeo did that was kind of unique was he would have actually 3 processions a week. Could you imagine having Eucharistic processions where he would take the Eucharist in a monstrance and process it through the streets, and the people could follow behind, or if the Eucharist passed your house, you could make the sign of the cross, and at least the people were seeing Jesus walk by their homes when they looked out the window. And so he got the people to pray to Jesus and ask for the Lord's mercy, that they would be spared deaths in their own family from the pandemic. But it's just interesting that our stained glass window here in Maytown, it actually has, they said that when St. Charles Borromeo would go in procession, that he would actually put a noose around his head. So that's what that cord is doing in the stained glass window. Remember that it's not a tie. You can see right next to the cross there, that little red knot around his neck. And then you can see the tail of the rope going down. It's red, so it kind of blends in with his vestments, but you can see the 2 tail ends of the rope or the cord. And it's like a noose that he put around his head. And so he was telling the people of Milan in his diocese that he was willing to die for them, that he was willing to risk catching the bubonic plague and passing away like those other 17,000 people, that he was willing to die for his people like a good shepherd does. And you can also see, remember we talked about how he has barefoot. You can see just his toes here, huh? He wasn't wearing shoes when he went in procession. So another he's suffering by not wearing shoes, so the stones would have bit into the soles of his feet, and yet he endured those sufferings for his people. So he was doing penance for his people while he was processing throughout the streets of Milan then. So that's just a little bit about Bishop Charles Borromeo, and there's just such a beautiful window that I had to take you out here to Maytown's church. And I hope to explain the other windows at the churches in Sublette and West Brooklyn as well, so that, like I said, your children can become experts in their parish, that they would know about the stained glass windows, special things about the Stations of the Cross, and the layout of their altar in their church. And so if relatives or their cousins come over during the holidays to celebrate Mass, they could be like a little tour guide and actually give a tour of their church and explain the spirituality of, in this case, St. Patrick's Church, Maytown. Hope you've enjoyed this e-learning for our 2020-2021 school year, and I hope to have another e-learning for you next week. God bless you. St. Charles Borromeo, pray for us.